Hey folks, I'm doing this update today, talking about the upcoming, what I perceive to be a sort of new renaissance. We are at a period right now, here, after after the recent eclipse and things that really, that happened in 2020 that really shook things up. And again, it's a sort of disorienting time right now. I've been saying, in fact, I said it last year, that we were really starting a major shift, especially toward some great stuff that happened once Saturn moved into Capricorn. We were going to have 5 or 6 years of large global shifts occurring around our monetary systems, our relationship with the planet. Once COVID started in 2020, I said the biggest thing that this is really showing us is how we're living out of alignment with nature, especially our relationship with animals, um, you know, meat consumption, meat eating, mindless, sort of rapacious appetites for resources and all kinds of things like that. I talked about this in 2020. Um, and again, as we moved forward with COVID, and now we're here where we've been quite polarized because of other things, I'm not losing sight of the ball. I'm not taking my eye off the ball. These things are still moving forward. They're still advancing. The fact that there's been, contentiousness around different parts of it is just part of what we're moving through. But I'm going to be doing a case study in this video where I'm talking about the last 2 times that Saturn and Jupiter came together at this point in the zodiac. The last time was in 1960, 1961, and the time before that was 1900. So these are 60-year cycles. And we can see in both cases, when we had this transit the last couple times, we've had major improvements, major shifts, a real renaissance. Again, in the 60s, it was right when this happened. John Kennedy had just been elected. Again, this was right, or John Kennedy was about to be elected. The exact date, I'll bring it up here in a second. But the time before that, when it happened in 1901, Teddy Roosevelt had just become president after McKinley was assassinated, and this started a whole new cycle for the next 5 to 10 years of innovation and of progress. It was a whole renaissance that happened then. It's a renaissance that happened in the 60s, where we were coming out of the war, depression, war era, and the old guard with a young, new, vibrant, zeitgeist through the 60s. And we're seeing that same thing now. Even though it doesn't look like it, that's what we have. And I even talked about this as part of the 2020 election. Before I got into the specifics of the two candidates, I was talking about historically that we've seen 1 or 2 different trends happening when we have elections with Jupiter in Sagittarius, which is where Jupiter was. And it was either the reaffirmation of a usually conservative president or a young new course, because Barack Obama was elected the last time Jupiter was here, on the election in 2008. That's when Barack Obama's first term started. The time before that, or then if we go back to 1960, was when John F. Kennedy was elected. But then in between, we had second terms of other presidents. So again, I've been making references to this possibility of a new renaissance that's coming now. And so I wanted to do this case study just to let people know. Now, this is also, if I want to put this link here because some people still have not gotten the 2020 forecast yet. And again, this is a free forecast that you can get. I do one every year. If you saw it, if you saw it last year, you saw how accurate it was to predict that the first part of the year we were going to have major problems. It was obvious in 2020 that the big shifts was Saturn moving into Capricorn, and then Mars and Jupiter there, and all this pile up of energy from the beginning of the year until around the middle of the year. The first like 6 out of the 10 big shifts in 2020 all revolved around this same intense, fierce, fighting through, transforming, hanging in there energy, and we got COVID. So these things were described in great detail, and then. So I do this every year, and again, all you need to do is go to that website. It's actually 2021 Vedic Astrology. That's the link. It's easy to remember. Then when you go there, you just click register now, and you can either watch the instant replay, or you can register over the next couple of days. And then after you register, by the way, you get taken to a page that allows you to get your forecast, for your sign. And that's also really valuable. So go ahead and do that, and you'll learn these most important shifts of 2021. So if we go back here now to the chart, you'll see that this is where we are right now. And I want to just go back. We're very close to this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, which is going to happen exact on the solstice, on the 21st. We have Jupiter-Saturn exactly, coming together. If you look at these degrees here of longitude, of ecliptic longitude, you'll see that Saturn and Jupiter come together, boom, like right at this time on the 21st. And so again, that's an exact, not just ecliptic longitude, but also ecliptic latitude. So they're visually almost inseparable from each other. But if we want to go back and see the last time that we had this, we go back 60 years to see the last time we had this, the last time we had this exact conjunction, let's run this back a few months, or forward a few months, you'll see, so it was, let me go back here, it was, the exact conjunction was Jupiter, Saturn. It was right at the edge. Oh, it was also very early Capricorn here that time as well. Very early Capricorn. It was early 1961, right after John F. Kennedy was inaugurated, right? So we see that, again, this time of the early 60s when JFK was inaugurated, again, historically, you want to remember what this was. We had been through, first of all, we've been through the Great Depression with Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR. We came out of that into the New Deal, into a progressive society with Roosevelt and social programs, and then into World War II. Again, the 30s and 40s, and were really dominated by socially progressive policies. But then as we, in the post-war era, the post-World War II era, we had, we had Truman and then Eisenhower for 8 years. So again, the 50s was kind of like, quite a conservative time. And then the beginning of the 60s and John F. Kennedy, there was a whole kind of youthful renaissance where, where at least America, I'm talking more about America geopolitics, so forgive me, I am American, and so that's, but it's not just in America, because if you remember throughout the 60s, some of the main things that happened, there was a real renaissance in music, the Beatles, right? And rock and roll and music, and a more inclusive, all of the social movements of the 60s, and the spirit of togetherness and the questioning of the old guard, questioning of the old paradigm. By the time we got into after the dissolution of Kennedy being assassinated, for example, we still had our incursions like in Vietnam and all these other kind of things, but I'm speaking more on a cultural level of the people, not necessarily governments here. But we definitely see innovation, especially scientific, technological innovation. This was the real beginning of the space age, where again, by the end of the 60s, we were on the moon, we were, innovating in that way, and all kinds of technological advances, supercomputers and computing, and you see all of the advances even in filmmaking and in especially art forms and whatnot. Things really went to the next level in the 60s. And we really are, again, seeing a similar kind of shifting now. I'll just talk about some of the things that we've been seeing technologically. For example, we're back so many new innovations, especially like in with the space movement, like SpaceX, the company by Elon Musk. New ways of doing things that are that are more palatable, that aren't really dependent on the government so much, but we can see some of the same kind of innovations even now, as we just saw. Like, we're getting the vaccines right now. We're on the cusp of a renaissance in medicines and ways to deal with certain how humanity goes forward, both with not just how we administer vaccines, which is certainly hotly contested right now, but how we approach health and wellness in general. Because again, there's so much contentiousness now around, again, things like vaccines and the old ways of doing things as it relates to health, as it relates to our relationship with the planet. For example, other advances in the 60s that we started paying attention to were things like ecology and returning to nature, and returning and having more respect for the earth, and not just in an industrialized, mechanized way. So all of these things were really questioned and challenged in the 60s. We also had, for example, there was a new, especially Lyndon Johnson politically, with the with his with Voting Rights Act, and a lot of people think this was wrong, the welfare state or whatever. But all the innovations, also with the social safety net, and of course in 60s it was also that filtered down into obviously like voting rights for for blacks and minorities. And again, so the whole decade went from being this puritanical 50s antiseptic, even on TV and whatnot. Like, for example, I think one of the most popular shows was I Love Lucy, and Lucy and Ricky were like married on the show, but even we were so conservative that they couldn't even show Lucy and Ricky in the same bed together. Even though they were supposed to be married, they had two separate beds in their bedroom, right? They had kid, but they couldn't show them in the same bed. So we really went from this kind of puritanical version. The end of the 50s started to show it with rock and roll, but again, by the end of it, we had really gone to a totally different place. And at the time, it was really wrenching for the conservative, and again, white people. This was like white people, basically. This is what America is, mainly white people. And, here, again, it started with the blacks and fire hoses being turned on them, and Martin Luther King, again, and civil rights, human rights, and the changes that spelled. Again, by the middle 60s to the end of the 60s, we had a whole new social contract, whole new socially acceptable and unacceptable ways of dealing with each other. And again, so I see these same shifts now. Look at 2020 and all that COVID brought out, all of the issues that it brought out, including the social issues, the Black Lives Matter movement, again, rethinking all this again, rethinking our relationship to nature, rethinking our relationship to health, Do we want to be, getting vaccines, for example? What is the point of doing this crap and not honoring our health and looking at our dietary habits and these kinds of things and holistic relationship with the earth if we're just not going to look at that at all, and then our solutions wind up being some scientific, concoction that's shot into our arm with a vaccination that is, an mRNA, strand that goes in and teaches our immune system how to create an antibody, whatever all that is. Like, this can't be the best solution that we've ever come up with. And so so all of these things, look at how contentious all this is right now. And again, people sometimes get upset because I just talk about these things. But, if this bothers you and you're like, oh, stick to astrology, blah, blah, then leave, okay, if you don't want to hear it. And I am sticking to astrology because astrologers, in this context, we can also see how the astrology that we're dealing with right now is being shown historically. And this is what makes astrology also something alive and real, and not just something in some esoteric, on a shelf somewhere. This is how astrologers, if they're good astrologers, this is how we can see all of this divine energy coming down and shaping our events. And it's not hard to see parallels between where we've just come from, particularly like with the last 4 years, and the focus on, what one might say, if we just look at, for example, the demographics of the Trump supporters, the ones that put Trump in office or whatever, it's 75% white or something, and that his voter base is that, demographic. He plays to that all the time, plays to that base all the time. And again, it has agitated a lot of these social issues that we thought had been resolved, for example, brought them up anew. And so again, at the end of that, we're now, and in a way that was shocking, and it's still shocking that this whole thing has been revealed. So we're now at this inflection point where we're moving away from that and moving towards something else. And again, we can look at that even as the kind of spasm of the sort of transition from the early 60s. JFK was killed in 63, which was really before a lot of the social changes began. That was such an upheaval and such a shocking, wrenching event. And then we started to really deal with a lot of the things that happened in the 60s. And so I see a lot of parallels here. And I also just want people to see that even though we're here right now, I've said before, and I'll say it again, we're on the verge of a renaissance. This is what it is. It's not, and again, people can choose, and many are choosing to see it as like the end of the world or something, because what's being called the Great Reset and these other buzz phrases that are going on. Again, these things have been said and talked about for a long time, and there's definitely, again, dangers about the corporatization of health and everything. Everything is motivated by one problem right now, and that's money. Money is the root of all of the problems and the root of all evil, you would say. We don't need to look toward something, some deep conspiracy to see very clearly that this is the simple explanation. Again, things are moving in a very positive direction where we're going toward more sustainable systems, more open, a more open relationship with, with nature and with each other, coming together more around all of these things. I just got this funny comment. Sam, you're a walking negative sign. Anything positive you see in the astrology? I don't know. I think I'm saying all of it is positive, dude. Saying it's a renaissance of evolving these things toward the next level. So, if I seem negative, you have a choice to leave, so you could do that if you want. So I don't see where I'm saying anything that's that negative. I'm saying that we've seen we have a lot of polarity right now in the world, and things are moving toward a higher level and a higher relationship with these things. And this is what we need to be doing. We're the ones that can create this, or need to be creating this new world. It's not going to be governments. It's not going to be, the governments are there. The people are the government. It's a product of our choices, and we're going to be making different choices because, again, even as I just mentioned, the old guard, which you can relate the old guard or the last 4 years, like with the elections that we just had, and that group, they're getting older and more irrelevant as time goes on. We're getting further and further away from that, and again, younger people who are going to be the solutions for the future, who are going to, find the solutions to the problems that we face. It's going to be more and more progressive in that regard, to where, whether it's sort of blockchain technologies and other kinds of, again, sustainable organic solutions. These things are getting worked out now, and we have to support those things. And so so again, I'm just pointing these things out. What I'm doing, again, the people that have a problem with what I say are ones that don't like me, who, again, support Trump and all this stuff. I can't dance around that forever, okay? You just have to say things. This is where we are, and if you feel good about that, then keep supporting that. What I'm saying is that we're obviously moving in another direction, and what it represented, because people now have attached so much to one person, like their whole identity revolves around a person rather than an ideology. At heart, the ideology is a conservative one, where we want things to be the way they were. That's the ideology. We want things to be the way they were. We want this privilege. We want this sort of homogenous nature. And we can even see, even with the next presidency that's coming in, whatever someone might think of Biden, one of the things that I think is great that we can already see is the diversity. The cabinet is a mix of, we just had the first Native American appointed to a government post. Okay, so this is a progressivism that is coming, that is, again, kind of like a renaissance. And if you don't think that's a renaissance or a positive thing, then maybe you just hate me and maybe you want to leave. I don't know. But this is how I'm reading the astrology. And I think there's historical precedent for that. Just like on the cusp of the early 60s, there were people that hated John Kennedy and this young Catholic, all kinds of stuff. They hated what he represented, for example. And again, I'm talking historically about being on the cusp of that change at that time. I see the similarities. I'm going to go back to 1900 and talk a little bit more about what happened also the previous time as well, so you'll also see the parallels. So again, we can see the parallels to the 60s, at least I do. I think it's pretty clear. And again, a new possibility for a higher level of inclusivity, of a new relationship, again, with nature, with technology, with health and healing. All these things are sort of converging right now. And again, we can even see it in the fear and the difficulty where, for example, technology and health, like, again, vaccinations that have the potential for, like, nanobot technologies and other kinds of solutions that are not the best solution for humanity. The best solution is to find a way to live in harmony with nature, in a humane relationship with nature, with animals, with the world, with the oceans. So again, there's going to be all kinds of solutions, but we need to be focusing on that. We need to be acknowledging things like climate change is real, and we need to move toward greener technologies, and we need to do all of these things. And again, a lot of that stuff has just been thrown overboard for the last several years. And I don't think we're going to go back to that. We're going in this other direction now. So if we go back to the last time, let me just go back and show 10 years even before the 1960s, and you'll see. So we had this Sun Jupiter, this Jupiter Saturn at this time. Let me just bring it forward here. We got this here like, okay, they went retrograde, then they went forward. So the exact passage, see, you got to go, that Jupiter's got to hit it and pass it. And it's exact about right here. So here we are, the end of 1901, right? End of 1901. Now what had happened at that time is the President McKinley had been killed and Teddy Roosevelt became president. Again, you have to remember that this time in history was also very, very ripe. This was even more ripe than the 60s for sure. But this, within that 10-year window, and I'm talking about a 10-year span, because again, from like 1960, 61 to the end of the 60s, like that, 10-year span, a huge shift. Jupiter, Saturn comes together. Again, 1900 to like 1910 or so, or even within the first 5 or 6 years. First of all, 1903, we had the Wright brothers, the first flight at Kitty Hawk. Again, innovations in aerospace, in fact, the first flight, right? And again, you can see the parallels between what's going on now with new rocket technology, sustainable, reusable rocket technologies, and the capacities to just have a reimagined version of what it could be to go into space, like civilian space travel, staying on the space station longer, maybe unmanned trips to Mars or whatever the next thing would be, maybe going back to the moon again, or whatever. But we see the innovation in flight. 1903, again, right after this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in 1901, within a year. The other thing, major, Albert Einstein publishes a theory of relativity, 1905. Huge. How much did that change the world? Huge scientific advancements. And again, we're seeing the same kind of scientific advancements in how fast we got these vaccines, for example, in other kinds of, again, I'm not a molecular scientist or whatever, but there's been so many new things in astrophysics and discovering different kinds of matter in the universe and whatnot. Gigantic advances are happening right now. So again, I think we're really on the cusp of all of this kind of innovation right now. The other thing that happened, which was also really important, was, the Ford Motor Company started back then. And by 1908, the Ford Model T, which was the first mass-produced automobile, was on the market. So again, look at these innovations in, mass production and whatnot. And again, these were also, they're sort of double-edged swords. There was also really the beginning of a lot of the industrialists and industrialism as well. Excuse me. And so and again, none of this is all good. I never talk about anything in a way that's all good or all bad or whatever. You just try to see it for what it is. But there's no question that from the 1900s to like 1910, so many incredibly important things happened. Again, flight. How important is that, right? We started to fly. We see the parallels now. And I think we're right on the cusp of major new innovations. And again, even with flight, even with like airplane technology and whatnot. And again, things like different ways to produce, like, for example, the Ford Motor Company and mass production, techniques and practices, or just business practices in general. For example, one of the things that COVID did and what it made us do, aside from, the virus and seeing how people respond to it or whatever, but it's also showed us that we need to rethink, and we can rethink, our entire relationship with work, right? It's one of the first things I said is look at what happened when COVID hit last year. We can remember all the way back before all the weirdness started. Think back, okay, now we stay home. So many jobs that we used to be able to go to, now we can't go there anymore. But so many of them we didn't need to go to. all the people that work in these tech companies, for example, all of the time and energy and resources wasted on driving all over the place where we don't need to. Most people, especially when we work at tech companies now, or the people who do, you don't need to get in your car and drive to some building so you can sit in front of a computer. You can do that at home. You can do so much work now, especially the online, the online world, the computerized world. You can do it at home and save all of that time, money, resources. And I said then, we're not going back. We're not going back to the way it was in that regard. All of these tech companies now, even when they come back to work, even when it starts again, it's not going to be the same. There's no reason, because employees are going to demand that not be the case anymore. Like, well, why do we need to go back to that? It's been great to stay home. We're still getting our work done. What's the point? So again, freeing up our time again. So again, instead of something like the Ford assembly line and cranking out Model T cars, which was an innovation in the workplace in 1905, we see the innovation in the workplace now. Again, it was kind of forced on us with COVID and whatnot, but we saw what we were capable of. And I just saw not too long ago, it was, and you can look it up, look at the recent, trends and studies in these, like, companies that make, like, things like mock meat and tofurkey and these forms of, you might say, artificial meat, since COVID happened. These companies are just booming because, again, people started really looking at their health a lot more. And all of these benefits that happened when COVID hit last year, we're going to permanently change things. We're going to change our relationship with, with endless travel and travel industries and other kinds of things are all going to be rethought, reimagined. They're not all going away, but it's going to be changed. And so we're in the midst of all of those big changes right now. Just like in the early 1900s when we had a total revolution in our approach to work and the workplace and our time. Again, not to mention things like theory of relativity. And, we're seeing all kinds of interesting and amazing advances in the sciences and whatnot now as well. So, again, I'm making this because, again, people, we're at a time right now, and again, even though somebody earlier said I sound like a lot of darkness, really? Listen to some other astrologers. You want to hear some darkness? This is about a new renaissance that I see coming, and that I don't see it's a lot of darkness at all. Where we've come through some real darkness, and we're still in it. It's not finished. We're still, clunking toward the next thing. We're grinding toward it. There's a lot of other astrological principles here in place. Of course, we're still in this. Oops. We're still in this. We have the nodes here. Here and let me go back here. We still have this. We're at about here right now. We're close to this. And we're, we have Saturn still in Capricorn, Saturn, Jupiter in Capricorn. The nodes are still in these fixed signs, Taurus and Scorpio. And, we set in motion a lot of karma a few years ago that we're not finished with as a country, as a world. And again, the further we get away from that, the next thing that's coming, we're not just going to forget all of that. And we're going to pull the future along with us for the ride. And again, we're going to have to find more sustainable ways to, to interact with, with nature and with each other. And again, renew that social contract. And seeing it so, frankly, abused in the last couple years has been a shocking wake-up call for a lot of people. And, so I want to just put here that, again, if you're interested in, again, the 2020 forecast, or I'm sorry, the 2021 forecast is something, it's free. You can just go and learn these 10, it's 10 important shifts. The other thing that I do is I analyze the Jupiter cycle, because Jupiter is going back and forth. In 2021 between Capricorn and Aquarius, it goes back and forth. And that's going to really bring into focus a sort of house axis for you, based on whatever your sign is. So again, if you're Virgo, this is the 5th and the 6th house. If you're Scorpio, it's your 3rd and 4th houses. So again, I talk about that in great detail for each sign in the forecast, but then I also talk about this new cycle of hope, January 12th, the new moon in Sagittarius. The first new moon of the year, the first new moon after the solstice, is really the beginning of the year, especially in Indian times, the Vedic people. That's when they began the year. The first new moon after the winter solstice, once the sun starts moving north. And that's, I talk about that. And again, how that influences each person. I talk about that in the specialized forecast for each person. But then we also have this pileup of planets, February 4th through February 12th, all these planets in Capricorn. Then we have an exalted Venus that comes March 16th to April 8th. Again, you want to understand how that works. And we also have some really great Mercury retrograde cycles next year. One second. Yeah, I also wanted to make sure to pull this up, is that you can also get these forecasts for your sign. And these forecasts for your sign, what I do, less than $20, I talk about each of these 10 shifts based on your sign. So again, if you're a Gemini person, then this Jupiter in Aquarius, when it shifts and moves into Aquarius, that's going to be your 9th house if you're a Gemini person, right? So that's going to be very different than if you're a Libra person, then it's your 5th house. Just like that new cycle of hope, this January 12th, this new moon in Sagittarius, if you're a Scorpio, that's your 2nd house, right? If you're Aries person, that's your 9th house. So all of this is specialized. If you want to go here and get the forecast for your sign, then you can do that. And that is also really important. Someone is, asking about, please clarify, what is my sign? It's your sidereal ascendant, okay? That's what your sign is in this case. It's your sidereal rising sign, not the sun, not the moon, your sidereal rising sign. If you don't know what that is, then I don't know what to say. Go to a Vedic astrology chart calculator and do it. Again, it's based on the Lagna, rising sign always. So, again, each of these 10 things are then analyzed based on your chart, and you can also get all 12 sign forecasts, which again is a very good way to also see how an astrologer does this, because you'll get to hear me talk about all of these placements for each of the 12 signs. So you hear me analyze the same situations 12 different times. So you get to understand how to make these predictions. So anyway, again, this is free. So just go register for that. Again, it's free. You can watch an instant replay or sign up to, for a special viewing. And then also, again, make sure to get the specialized forecast. And they're done. They'll be finished on the 20th. I'm getting them all done now in a few days. So again, I just wanted to make this update. And, I think I'm bringing, from what I'm saying here, is a lot of good news. Again, I see people, especially some people, are just stuck, frankly, unfortunately, I mean, in some very old triggering, and again, especially as it relates to this election that just happened, people are still like bound and determined that, the world is ending because Donald Trump might not be president and the whole world's going to come to fall apart or something. And I don't know why people are just hanging on to this kind of thing, but I'm making this also to show that historically, and again, the last two times that we had this powerful Jupiter-Saturn connection at this place in the zodiac, it's been a time where there was a lot of progress that happened. We're on the verge of enormously progressive, like a renaissance. Again, think of the renaissance that I just talked about with the innovations and the renaissance in flight, from 1900 to 1910, theory of relativity, new approach to work and mass production, and really ushering in the modern, say it's an industrial age, but the modern approach to work and whatnot with, Henry Ford and automobile age and whatnot. Think of how innovative that was. From 1900 to 1910, there are other things as well, like, for example, the first World Series. There was a lot of innovations even in things like, sports and whatnot as well. Like, again, the first World Series was in 1903. So again, even things like baseball and games, and we really organized our culture at the beginning from 1900 to 1910. So many things that we just kind of take for granted. And again, 1961 was when it came together, but Kennedy had just been president, and again, it represented a lot of people were just like, oh, these kids, again, a similar kind of this old guard that are like that are scared of the emerging, the diversity in the country. Back then, the diversity was also really concentrated around black people, but we're still dealing with it now. We're still dealing with African American issues now, so much later. And not just African Americans, but again, look at all the problems with the immigration and black and brown and Latinas and the whole diversity of America and in the world. So these issues, we're on the cusp of a new paradigm with that, a more humane relationship with each other. And again, also, I think with nature, again, especially when we look at the 60s, all the ecology movements, the social movements really, really went to the next level, where we realized that the people have the power. That was the greatest thing about the 60s uprisings. And it wasn't just in the US, it was all over the world. Not to mention, and it's my hope, that we have a revolution and a new culture in the arts, especially music. Because one of the biggest sadness and the lament that I have for the world right now is we have no common cultural music and beautiful like music that we all rally around. Everything has become political and all this crap. And again, in the 60s, it really started where people came together around something that was bigger than just all these weird political issues and all this other stuff. And we were united around these themes, and it gave hope and then higher aspiration. And again, we're the agents. We're the ones meaning all of us, we're the ones that can and must, inhabit the world and make the world what we want it to be. And, I do my part, and I hope everyone does their part to share wisdom and beauty and support those policies or those ideas that are going to bring about, the next world. And again, of course, that includes our relationship with nature and animals. We decide all of that by our choices. Absolutely plain and simple. Let's say we stop eating hamburgers, people will stop slaughtering cows. We stop buying this stuff, they'll stop making it. And we will innovate in other ways. We stop, driving. We drive less, or we use more fuel efficient cars, or we do these things, and our dependency on it comes down. We start, electing leaders or supporting industries that get us away from, things that contaminate the air or whatnot, and this stuff will start to fade out. We start to, support companies that, for example, clean up the oceans and do all of these other mass projects that we need to take on as humans and that'll be the world. So I see us on the verge of these kinds of breakthroughs. At least that's the potential. And again, right now we're at this point where we're not quite finished with the last thing yet, and it doesn't happen overnight. Just like it didn't happen overnight in 1900 to 1910. You know, I can say this now as like a block of time. That was 10 years, 8 to 10 years. Or the 60s, and say the 60s. Started with John Kennedy, ended we were on the moon. Well, that was 10 years. And it was, or, you know, it was a process. When it first started, like when they were where we are right now, let's say Kennedy had just been elected and none of that had started. It was just a hope. And again, we can even look at, I'll just say, with U.S. politics, we can see, even though Biden is an older guy, for example, there's a lot of younger people, you know, a black, you know, African-American female vice president, and then we have diversity all throughout the rest of the cabinet. And he seems to be, him as a leader seems to be, you know, really noticing his place, being on the cusp of that. And again, I'm not a big political person, to be honest with you. I'm not an advocate. I don't love any of them or it, but I can look at it. I'm just looking at it objectively. Like there's this. These are clear choices, even though they're all drinking from the same polluted trough. That's what we see from leaders, but leaders are going to respond to people, and social movements are on the forefront of the change that has to happen. Like in the 60s, the people rising up and the people supporting these different issues are what drives change. And it still happens now like that. So again, I'm just showing you the astrological correlation between where we're at now with this Jupiter-Saturn connection and the last two times it happened in this part of the zodiac. And again, we saw it in Sagittarius, we saw it in Capricorn. It's still this same cycle every 60 years. So from 1960 and then from 1900. And I see the same parallels here. And so that's what I wanted to talk about. I hope this was helpful for you. And again, if you want to get the 2021 forecast, you know, you see it there. It's just 2021vedicastrology.com. And if you want to get it for your chart, you can follow that link that I just put in there. And I hope you have a great weekend. And the next big thing is the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction there. And it's really dialing in this intensity and this change and this next level. So I hope you're feeling good. I'm very hopeful about where things are going. And, you know, I think we need to have compassion for those who aren't, for those who are tangled up in fear. And, you know, I don't like to use words like brainwashing because it sounds so heavy, but we get brainwashed and hypnotized by a lot of things. It's not necessarily such an insidious, you know, underbelly to it, but just where people have bought into and believed this like dark future, this dystopian dark future. So many people are so paranoid and so terrified of the future right now. And what I'm saying is I see that, again, we have a lot of problems and a lot of difficulties, and we're on the cusp of great shifts and great changes. And I don't see any reason personally to be cooperating with all of that. And we have a choice. You have a choice. If that's your mindset and you're in that, that's your mind. Your mind is your own. You choose what to align with. And is just as much as there could be a dark, sinister potential, there's a light potential. And I'm also showing this because it's not just some painting lipstick on a pig, blind optimism. I'm showing you literally the last few times these things happened, there was always good and bad in the midst of it. But historically, you can clearly see that these were great times of, you know, great inflection points in history where the last couple times these two planets came together at this point in the zodiac. Some of the most hopeful times that we had and some of the most transformative. And so that's what we're doing right now. And, you know, I I hope that makes sense to you. I hope, I don't think it's Pollyannish. I also don't think it's too negative. I think it's just a clear view, at least from my point of view, of where we're at, how things are, and how the astrology is really showing this. So, anyway, have a good one.